you were referencing was when I was working on my book, I tracked down levels, 5 degrees of outsourcing.
Oh, shit.
And the airline outsourced the maintenance to a facility. The facility said, well, we don't have the people to do this. They outsourced it to someone else. And then finally, because the composite materials that are used, we used to say metal on airplanes, but now it's sophisticated composite materials. They're similar to what are often used in surfboards. One of these outside repair stations sent an aircraft part to a surf shop in Southern California. And an FAA inspector showed up there and said, do you have any aeronautical training? Do you have any aviation background? No, dude, I'm just,
I'm just a surfer, bro.
Okay, well, give me that part and don't ever do this again. That's what we're talking about here. There's, the question is who's in control. When you hear a big name like Boeing, you think, well, okay, for better or worse, they're on top of these things and they have control over what's going on. They don't. There's so much outsourcing. And the scariest part of all is that the Federal Aviation Administration, which is charged by Congress and is there to protect all of us, they don't have a good handle on who's doing the work, where the work is being, when it's being done. And so we basically have a self-policing system. And that's how these problems keep occurring, particularly with the Boeing Max.
I'll jump in there. The last commercial airline plane crash in the U.S. was in 2009. There are 0 fatalities. You said Tombstone Agency. No one dies. No one is harmed in plane travel. So all the problems you're describing doesn't sound like problems to me. It sounds like the airlines are getting more efficient with absolutely 0 trade-off in safety whatsoever. No discernible change in the danger in flying. So what is the downside of what you're describing? What is the evidence that any of this is unsafe for American airline passengers?
Well, first of all, a woman was killed when she was sucked out of a Southwest Airlines aircraft just about 5 years ago. That was a case in which an engine basically exploded on a Southwest 737 and shrapnel hit the fuselage. The FAA was asked to ground airplanes with that engine. They didn't. And then a few months later, because they didn't ground it, the exact same thing happened with the exact same engine type, also on a Southwest 737. And this time a woman was sucked out over Philadelphia and she was.
Oh, fuck.
The fact is
oh my God.
that you're right. I mean, we all know,
that's fucked
most
up.
of us know, that we are in an era of unprecedented safety and the fewest fatalities we've ever seen in the history of the industry. However, when you talk to real aviation safety experts, the people that crunch the numbers and analyze these things, they will tell you that while obviously the accident record and the fatal accident record, those are important measurements, they are not the only measurements. That does not mean that we don't listen to whistleblowers. That does not mean that we don't look at trends that are going in the wrong direction. As one safety expert said to me before the Deepwater Horizon event in the Gulf of Mexico, the day before that happened, that explosion, the safety record was 100%. But meanwhile, there were people that were saying there's a problem. We have a problem with oversight in this country. To rest on laurels and to say, well, look, the accident record speaks for itself. It doesn't speak for itself. The fact is there's enough evidence that not the same level of FAA oversight. There is not the same level of attention. Now, people were saying the same thing about the accident record outside the United States a few years ago. And then we saw 2 fatal accidents totaling, 346 people with those 2 MAX aircraft. That was not on U.S. soil, but it was a U.S. aircraft. And again, you just say, well, the safety record speaks for itself. It doesn't speak for itself. It's a big measurement. I'm not dismissing it, but there are other factors that we need to consider.
And before we wrap, how concerned should people be about Nikki Haley's role in this specifically, especially given that she's doing better than expected in the presidential race? What can we glean from her choice to intervene here? It seems to prevent the kinds of regulations that might make planes more safe in the United States.
Well, I for one would love to see one of the reporters following her on the campaign trail after about this. I haven't seen that yet. The bottom line is Boeing is a very political company. It is the largest exporter.
It's a Canadian company.
Number 2 defense contractor. It is so interwoven with the government. Nikki Haley was on the board, Carolyn Kennedy was on the board. you underestimate Boeing's lobbying footprint, at your peril. This is a company that is so intrinsically bound to the U.S. government. Much of the research and development that Boeing has developed over the years has come from either the Pentagon or from NASA. My colleague Matt Stoller just recommended the other day that Boeing be nationalized. That they are basically a monopoly here in the United States. There are effectively two large aircraft manufacturers worldwide, Boeing and Airbus in Europe. And we have to look at some new ways of addressing Boeing's political footprint, because Nikki Haley is a very disturbing development what came to light last week, but it's not at all surprising to those that follow Boeing. They have a tremendous lobbying presence.
Bill McGee, thank you so much for lending your expertise to this segment. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
C'est un VUSC pour transporter des passagers. Personne ne peut vous faire vivre le roi comme un idée. Parce que le roi, c'est notre raison d'être.
Nice song.
John Fetterman seems to be continuing his journey to the right, at least on the issue of Israel. The Pennsylvania senator made comments on Israel and immigration during a recent appearance with Jake Tapper that ran contrary to his party's base and received audits from those on the right. Let's take a look.
There's obviously a lot of progressives on Twitter have been attacking you for your position for noting that, in your opinion, saying that there is a crisis at the border does not make one xenophobic. Why do you think you've been so criticized by so many progressives?
I honestly don't understand. I don't understand why it's controversial to anybody to decide that you're going to stand with Israel in this situation. I honestly don't understand why it's controversial.
I don't understand why I can hear that you're fat.
I've been very
So,
clear. In fact, that was weaponized.
a lot of things we can understand in life.
In my race, that I'm very much a strong supporter of immigration, and my wife's family. That's an origin story about that. And I think two things can be true at the same time. You can be very supportive of immigration.
And you can also be fat.
You also need to have a secure border.
Fetterman also received some attention following Ron DeSantis' announcement that he had dropped out of the GOP primaries. Responding to an article announcing DeSantis' departure, Fetterman posted a photo of Mickey Mouse dressed as a king.
Unless it's a joint.
Come at the king, you best not miss. Some took this as a reference to Donald Trump, who's regarded as the seeming de facto leader of the Republican Party right now, though I see it as a reference to DeSantis' own personal feud with Disney.
My father, the inventor of toaster strudel.
All right, starting with Fetterman, I'll just say two things. He is not being deemed for some abstraction of having wanting a secure border. Everyone in America can say, of course, I want a secure border. I don't want dangerous things to come into the United States.
Right.
I don't want people to be queued up at the border for humanitarian reasons, sleeping on streets, being bused from out of city to city. Many people who are Democrats can observe that there's obviously a capacity crisis at the border that needs to be resolved. The question is how it should be resolved, and specifically the indictment against Fetterman is that he literally held out his wife, who was an undocumented immigrant, as an indication of his compassion for the plight of the undocumented. At the same time, that now he's advocating for very different kinds of policies to address the crisis at the border. He is not just someone who is married to someone who is an immigrant. Very specifically, she came here as an undocumented kid. She was a dreamer. Gained citizenship through marrying John Fetterman. So to have had that very personal experience, to be in love with someone, ostensibly, who is the kind of person in the exact same situation that so many people are now aligning with on immigration issues, are vilifying and would have deported in a heartbeat. That's the hypocrisy. That's the critique he's getting. That he seems to have flip-flopped on his views because him putting his wife's story out there seemed to indicate that he was kind of a very different posture on this thing.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I'm obviously somewhat out of step with the right on this issue because being very hardline on immigration is a big part of Trump's identity and a big part of where the conservative movement has headed in the last 10 years. Some of the change in direction of the Republican Party has been more aligned with me on foreign policy, but on immigration and some economic issues, it's definitely been the other way. I want, like Elon Musk says, I want, we want to have less illegal immigration because we want to have more legal immigration.
I don't care what Elon Musk says. I really don't.
To work, to participate in our economy, to move freely, and that would be better for everyone. That's obvious. If people want to come here, they should be able to do that, and that would make our country a better, richer place. And I don't, as I've said so many times, I just don't. I'm not persuaded by the narrative, that the doomerism some people have on the right. If we bring in all these people, that's going to spell the end for the Republican Party. The demographics are destined to great replacement idea. Just is not. It is clearly not true because people who come in have a mix of values. Some of the people that I would say are most hostile to conservatism or to what the right wants to do. Their ancestors have been here for hundreds of years, and they're the most affluent people in our society, and the most powerful and well-connected, and went to all the elite universities. They're not the people coming here. But of course, we want to have, like you just said, we're not particularly far apart on this issue, really. It's better, it's more safer for the immigrants to not have to come here under these unsafe conditions, these marches through the desert, relying on gangs and drug traffickers and all those people. And I understand for people who live on the border on the U.S. side, you don't want the disorder of having 10 cities be setting up, having the processing be difficult. So we do need to think all of that.
Sure. Okay, so that's one aspect of it. Going on to the Israel question, Fetterman is a free agent. Obviously, he can have whatever opinion that he wants on Israel. But it's worth noting that it's not progressives that are upset with him, the way Jake Tapper is framing it. Of course, we are. Like, the left is upset with him because the left largely enabled him to get elected in the first place and provided him so much political cover and resources in terms of campaigning and the like. But it is the entire Democratic Party, as indicated by this new poll. The Democrats are overwhelmingly supportive of his ceasefire. He is taking an outrageously framed position, as so many elected Democratic and Republican leaders are, with respect to Israel government.
In terms of what the voters
want. In terms of what the voters want. What else is this? This is ostensibly a democracy, right? So the Nation reported on this.
You're not a politician because fucking for what you want.
In responses to two separate questions, by a 2-1 margin, respondents indicated that they are more inclined to support members of Congress who support the ceasefire, and that they are less willing to support members of Congress who oppose the ceasefire. That was from a survey poll of about 1,000 Americans. Now, keep in mind that is very different from what the AIPAC and Democratic Party allies to AIPAC have been plotting on in Congress right now, saying that they pledge to spend as much as $100 million to boost primary challenges against Democrats who back a ceasefire.
Maybe he is in the wrong party now, in effect, given what
But he's not, because the Democratic Party loves AIPAC, the Republican Party loves AIPAC, and this is another one of those issues where the Democratic preferences of the majority of the elected are being ignored by a captured group of politicians that are bipartisan in nature, and in a bipartisan way are able to ignore what everyone in this country really agrees on, or what all those countries really agree on.
I mean, in the Democratic side, sure, Republicans are split on the question based on the latest polling.
But nonetheless, I saw the latest polling shows that the majority of Republicans and Democrats support a ceasefire. It's just something like 80% for Democrats and like 60% for Republicans.
Right, so the poll I'm looking at shows 50%, but maybe it's
okay, well, still, half of Republicans want a ceasefire, overwhelming majority, and I think a lot of independents, given the politics of independence tends to be less interventionist, are probably all in the same.
Right. I wish some of this polling on the ceasefire question would spell out exactly what people want. Think should be because I agree there should be a ceasefire. What are the terms of that going to be? And I think it's interesting.
Look, I think that's a legitimate question, but I do think that most of that polling response is driven by these really horrible images we're seeing out of Gaza. I mean, viral videos of brothers holding their dead, middle school age sisters and weeping uncontrollably. Parents picking up the bloody body parts of their children and collecting them in plastic bags. I mean, as much as the mainstream, look at the image that we have on our screen right now, complete and total devastation that really belies the idea that this is Hamas being targeted. We see demolition charges being set by at the IDF for entire residential blocks, watching them walk away and then film it on their social media, blowing up an entire.
But some of the people who oppose a ceasefire, it's like, I agree. I think if Israel should agree to have no more violence against Gaza and Hamas should agree to have no more violence against Israel, that would be a ceasefire, right? It's probably some of the people who oppose that don't believe that Hamas will follow through on that. They think there will be further attacks against Israel, so there can't be a ceasefire until Hamas is defeated.
Well, the fundamental problem is that that doesn't liberate the Palestinians from their occupation. And not to mention, of course, even on the West Bank where there is no Hamas, there have been hundreds of Palestinians killed. An American citizen, which is a Palestinian American who had visited Gaza on a trip, I mean, to visit family or what have you, or for journalism reasons, was murdered over the weekend in the West Bank, where again, there's no Gaza, there's no war, there's no Hamas. And it's not clear at this point if it was by the IDF or by settlers who are armed by the IDF and defended by IDF. So we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I think that is what people are responding to. And I don't think that's really about a partisan thing. I think it's about a humanitarian thing. And people just not wanting to see all this death and destruction on their
Well, no shit. Like,
More Rising right after this.
there's something wrong with your brain if you think fucking anybody fucking should die. Like, no one has any right to decide whether else someone lives or dies. Nobody. Only Jesus.
Et si on veut que l'argent travaille pour nous, il faut investir notre épargne retraite.
All these fucking crazy people who think that they're doing God's will. Like, you guys are fucked. Fucking absolutely fucked in the head. You can speak to Jesus, but when Jesus speaks to you, that's a problem.
We have some updates on the crisis at the southern border. An immigration deal drafted by Senator Chuck Schumer and James Langford seems dead on arrival in the House as congressional Republicans balked at what they saw as another mass amnesty bill. Chad Pergram writes on X that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is supportive of Senator Langford's work to, quote, finalize the most substantial border security policy in 30 years that would come not a moment too soon.
Meanwhile, the Supreme Court has issued an emergency injunction allowing Border Patrol agents to cut wire Texas had installed along the border near popular crossing. Litigation continues over other Texas immigration policies, including floating barriers in the Rio Grande, alongside the incarceration of illegal immigrants by the state. Those cases have yet to reach the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so this decision made a lot of conservatives on social media very angry yesterday.
What are they not?
It's an injunction. The decision, they haven't actually heard the case. That will take place. But in the meantime, those barriers, those security measures that the state erected can be taken down by the federal government. It was a 5-4 vote to
That's another one. Erected, penetrated.
With
can you use different phrasing? Maybe.
And Chief Justice Roberts and the liberals, Elena Kagan, Sotomayor, and Ketanji Brown Jackson on one side, and then you had Alito, Gorsuch, Thomas. Actually, well, there was one more. I'm misstating who.
Roberts and Barrett, and 3 liberal justices.
Roberts and Barrett, so not Kavanaugh. Roberts and Barrett. So that was perceived as kind of a betrayal from the conservatives on social media. Obviously, the issue is the federal government claims they have the jurisdiction, and in the previous Supreme Courts have recognized that ultimately they have jurisdiction on international border issues.
So this is a pretty clear federal preemption issue. I'm surprised, frankly, it wasn't more lopsided holding. I mean, just take for a second, imagine for a second that Texas is a Democratic state.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where Democratic Texas says, we're going to have open borders. Now suddenly would you feel different about whether or not federal policy should preempt state policy, given the kind of national implications of what a state on the border might do? So this doesn't mean that, federal policy is going to be one thing or another. And it certainly isn't an argument that no one's going to do this in the border. It's simply an argument that if you're someone who's hoping Donald Trump is going to win, or is looking at polls that's indicating Donald Trump is going to win, that the President of the United States federal mandate, congressional mandate, is what decides border policy, not whoever happens to be in control of the state that happens to be on the border with another country.
I think on the constitutional merits, you're correct. That's probably frustrating and cold comfort for the state of Texas that feels like, you know, the federal government is not willing to expend the resources to police the border, so we will step up and do it, and now you're saying we're not allowed to do it, which again, I think technically is in fact the case. That's what the Supreme Court decided temporarily in this injunction, and is probably ultimately what they will decide, is that it is a federal government issue. The federal government needs to fix the immigration system. It's their failure to act that puts us in this position.
But here's the issue. Biden has requested a $14 billion spend for the border. It's not getting passed because of Republican obstruction. So you can say that there's not enough commitment, there's not enough spending, there's not enough investment. But at the end of the day, what has been reported as happening is that Republicans know that being able to make a lot of hay about a border crisis helps them electorally, and they'd rather push the issue until the election in order to get the benefit of being able to say Joe Biden isn't doing enough about the border, which really raises the question about whether or not Republicans in Congress right now are putting the interest and safety of Americans before or after their political futures.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bipartisan failure, and a failure not to pair it with some improvements to the immigration system, because frankly, I mean, I have some, you know, I'm not as enthusiastic about the wall or people have found ways around this. I want to spend a gazillion more dollars on security measures that fail or are overcome, when what we really need to do is fix the underlying incentives and the system for people to come here, so that they're not coming here in that way. And then we're spending all this money on security measures that don't even work. I mean, it's a vast border.
The problem is that the underlying incentives, I know as much as some Republicans like to frame it as the incentive is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are standing on the border with a big welcome flag saying everybody come to America.
No, that's not what I'm
I
saying.
said some Republicans, you don't even identify as Republican. But the reality is the incentives are created by the fact that we're the wealthiest country in the history of the world that has spent so much of its time and energy and money applying sanctions to the global South, including countries in South and Central America, toppling governments, fomenting coups, and the like, that have created disastrous conditions for people who are, frankly, in walking distance is the nature of the land bridge to the United States of America. And either you're going to care that or you're not. But it's not going to happen by simply muscling up the border, because the incentives are there. People live in such terrible conditions that they are willing to leave their homes, everybody they know, everybody who speaks their language, and drag their children across in inhumane conditions in order for the hope of a better life. So between that I think fundamental issue that's not being really addressed by either party, and the fact that part of what's precluding this $14 billion package going through is Republicans saying, well, we don't have, how are we going to pay for it, and trying to make it contingent on other cuts to other policies.
I thought everybody has a sock problem. As it turns out, I'm a hoarder of socks.
Immigration, these social safety net policies. That's why we have this lack of traction here.
I mean, I would like to clarify and simplify the actual system for coming into the country legally, because it is hopelessly confusing. I heard everyone who thinks like, oh, wow, they just come here legally. Sit down, go through, take a look at the website, all the different ways in which you could possibly qualify, and then you're not qualified. And it costs a lot of money. You have to hire an attorney to do it. It takes forever. A small number of people are admitted that way. It is Byzantine, and it is unnecessary. It's bad. I mean, for people on the right, it's an example of government bureaucracy getting in the way of people peacefully promoting prosperity in their own.
I've handled a pro bono immigration case successfully. It was an asylum claim on the basis of persecution in the person's home country. And the aspect of it that I found to be most Byzantine and what took so long is simply waiting on a response from the administration office. Are incredible because we cannot get any funding to hire more administrative law judges and the personnel who administer these cases. You can't not spend money if you want there to be an asylum process that actually respects American rule of law and the values of liberty. There's no shortcuts around this. And I'm sorry, this is one of those instances where if you want the government to work effectively, and in this case, the government being the entity that patrols our borders, you have to fund the government. And so I'm really interested to see what Republicans do about this. One right-leaning commentator in particular, I should mention, weighed in yesterday on Twitter, Tucker Carlson, tweeted the following. He said, "So it's unanimous, everyone in power, from the White House to the hedge fund managers to the Supreme Court of the United States, has decided to destroy the country by allowing it to be invaded. That leaves the population to defend itself. The argument of Texas, why aren't they protecting their state and the nation?" Calling, it seems, upon individuals to take to the border and take things in their own hands.
Also, the Supreme Court emergency injunction was specifically saying, don't do
Don't
that.
do
You
that.
don't have the authority. And yeah, I don't think very fondly of calls for other people to commit potentially crimes. Again, this is increasingly a habit in some right-wing discourse to say, yeah, you, there's a faux populism to it. You go
Right.
march in the street. You go take up arms. I'm going to be tweeting from the comfort of my home and my
And right-leaning podcaster Bridget Feisty replied saying exactly that. Why aren't you, bro? Get down here and fight the federal government like a man.
Well, remember, this is, especially because many of those same people will point out that the person inducing you to commit crimes at the right-wing militia event is often a Fed.
Tucker Carlson is right. Yes. You can hear it here first, folks.
More rising right after this.
Yeah, coming.
Delivery Pass special offer. Get 30 days free when you sign up.
Vice President Kamala Harris appeared on The View yesterday to talk all things 2024, and, well, let's take a look. Harris asked what she was going to do to, quote, stop the crazies.
And what are you going to do to stop the crazies? I am scared as heck. Yeah, which is why I'm traveling in our country. You know, there's an old saying that there are only two ways to run for office. Either without an opponent or scared. So on all of those points, yes, we should all be scared.
What?
The Vice President also broke down what exactly this year's presidential election will mean for our democracy.
We are in the month of January. We've got 10 months to go until the election.
Mhm.
And increasingly, and you've seen it even just this week, we are all starting to narrow in on what this election will mean. And frankly, in the midst of so many big issues challenging our world that, you know, are not binary, you know, it's not just one side or the other. On this one, there's a split screen that you can throw up and see.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the choice between what is about respecting our democracy, what is about competence versus chaos.
Kamala Harris gave another warning about a possible Trump election win.
A person running to become the commander-in-chief was admitting he would weaponize the Department of Justice. These issues in terms of how we are doing, how our democracy and our country is doing, are inexcusable.
And here's one last clip from this action-packed View episode that we wanted to share with you for good measure.
We have to earn the reelect. And we have to communicate what we have achieved.
Yes.
And that is going to be one of our big challenges. We've done a lot of good work. We need to let people know who brought it to them.
All right,
There was,
let's take it from the
she
top.
said
Yeah.
so little with so much.
What I've noticed is that she does a thing where she'll just like point around the room and name things and state truths. So Robbie, we're drinking coffee in this room. And it's important to realize that when you have computers in front of you, you are at work. And when America goes to work, that's when we win.
Yeah, it's the
That's
emphasis rather than
fantastic.
the
That was
words.
so good.
It reminds me like of the Family Guy clip. There's an episode where Lois is running for mayor, and the dog Brian tells her, like, the voters aren't paying attention to actually words you're using; it's how you say it. And then she's just like, 9/11 was bad. 9/11. 9/11. Right? It's not. It's just empty. It's more the cadence than anything else with her.
But substantively,
What's
it
crazy?
is interesting.
What's
I'm going to come to that
That's funny.
right off the top. it seems like this is another one
Where are you?
with the views
Here.
framing. So
Right
I
there,
don't
go,
believe
Daddy.
that's a word that she
Daddy,
would have
feed you.
reached for necessarily, unless it was like printed on a mug in front of her. But the question is about how politicians should talk about the fact that 50% of the country is obviously conservative, and much of that 50% identifies specifically with the MAGA movement. Now, there were some branding attempts from the Biden administration to cordon off MAGA as a separate entity
Right.
than
and specifically not to round them up to half of the entire country, as Hillary Clinton famously did.
right. And I think the problem with that is that increasingly people either identify as MAGA as Republicans or feel like Trump is so embattled that even if they personally don't describe themselves as a MAGA, they would vote for him. I think we saw that in the Iowa polls, that people who did not self-identify as MAGA or who even thought that Trump might be liable for some of these criminal issues would still cast their vote for him regardless, because we live in a vote blue no matter who, lesser of two evils style country, or a lot of people who do have frustrations with Trump want to vote for him. And that being the case, are you going to tell all those people that are willing to vote for Trump because they're simply not Democrats? They simply, from a policy perspective, are never going to vote for a Democrat. It's just like no one at that table, except for Osafara, is ever going to vote for a Republican. Crazy. I'm not sure that is winning hearts and minds.
Right. She was set up for it, as you're right, because that's how Joy phrased it. But you could say, well, I mean, the people you're describing as crazy are our fellow Americans. Joe Biden is their president as well. It's impossible, but I'm going to try. I don't think Donald Trump is delivered for them substantially.
Much as people ask me why do I do these videos, I'm curious to know why people watch these videos. Is my main question. Aside from hoping that I fake snore at some point, that's the thing a guy asks me constantly. Can you fake snore? Like you, Angelo. You're a pretty frequent watcher. Why?
Again, you can just strategically just give up on these people. These people are crazy. These are not our voters. We're hoping to keep as many.
The reason I started doing it was because I was in an abusive relationship and I was being accused of, call it, being in places where I wasn't. So.
Crazy things that Republican politicians are saying and doing right now. After all,
I genuinely don't know why people watch me do nothing.
Like what Democrats do on their side. So, for example, you could pick up on the fact that there is this fear people have about whether or not Donald Trump in office and a Republican Congress is going to pass a national abortion ban. That's something that she could say, well, I don't want to weigh in on the constituents. We're running campaigns to bring this country together. That's what Donald
Can't do a national abortion ban.
But I am willing to say that there are people in our government and who are running for office who are trying to split us apart by passing laws that hurt to the most vulnerable among us. She could pick up on, let's say, some of Nikki Haley's recently condemned comments about what the cause of the Civil War was, or how America has never been a racist country. Nikki Haley was in office during the Charleston shooting, I believe, who had to take down the Confederate flag from the State House in South Carolina. Pick up on some of the easy wins that Republicans are handing up on you on a platter. They're in Kentucky. They're trying to pass a law that allows you to do self-defense to hit and violently attack homeless people. There are bills across the country.
Well, why do you think
Republicans trying to
suddenly they give a shit about the lower class and the homeless people? Because they finally figured out how to profit off them.
Republican politicians are doing that are out of step with even their states. Healthcare concerns. All of these things are a real problem. There's real problems in America. But instead of doing that, she leans into this framing, which I think shows a real lack of political instincts.
Then the next question, when she does exactly what you described it's January. 10 months to the election. 250 days.
I'm wearing blue.
Okay, we got it. It's your face. Thank you. Yeah. She also, I lost my train of thought. So did she. Oh, binary choice. It's a binary choice. Well, it's actually not a binary choice at all. In fact, there's a third person in the race who is holding 12%. You can't just write that off. So it's not in fact binary choice. There are other
Old work shirts that I've had made that really didn't last very long.
Millions of Americans will vote
Hate
for
logo.
other than the
Not my
Republican
choice.
Democrat. Both of us sitting here are probably not very likely to vote for the Democrat or the Republican. So to just do erasure on that is always kind of obnoxious.
Yeah, let's look at this. Marianne Williamson is currently leading.
I like her.
Phillips,
A little bit of hippie fucking dippy voodoo magic shit, but
she's at 6.4% of the vote as
sorry.
of today's 5:38 average poll. Phillips
I
is
feel
at
bad that she was
8.1%.
bullied out of the last election.
And to go on TV to not only shut down a primary, not only to change the debate, the primary schedule to
All the other
advantage
ladies
Joe
are fucking
Biden, putting
super mean and bullying her.
strongly first.
Every time she would answer a question, they'd just like look at you like,
But if you lie about the existence of a
hate that
Democratic
shit.
primary, if you're
Hate when women do
confident in
that.
your position, let the truth be known.
What are you guys laughing at? Nothing.
Compete
Fucking
for the votes
annoying.
that he feels so entitled to. But what's happening now?
Nothing, it's an
is
inside
they're
joke.
lie people into
Like, fuck you.
believing that they had no other options. And then when they go to the polls, or facing when the polls this fall, they might look around and say, well, I'd rather just stay home because none of these options are out there. And they're going to turn around and blame the very base who has been waving the red flag, ringing the alarm bells loudly now for months for their failure. to
Billabong.
beat Trump.
Yeah, they want it. They
I haven't heard of Billabong in forever.
Actually, they want it to be one short of a binary.
What are you talking about?
Not because it's Trump. There's no one else in the
Everyone
ballot.
is close.
They gotta protect them.
Biden and like January 6th.
Echo, I think, bought them out.
That would be ideal from their standpoint. More rising right after this.
Now I see Echo and shit in fucking Walmart. They have fucking Polo at Walmart. So fucking like. So weird hearing him talk. He started online gaming.
JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon is re-entering the political fray.
Nice
The
to
new
be his
efforts
friend.
to Democrats
Even if they're
grow
wrong.
up and listen to Trump supporters because Trump was
Because
kind
if they do drugs, even if they're online, who cares?
At
Ah,
Davos,
no one has to deal with their drug
talking to
problems.
Democrats about how they need to sit down and shut up.
People are growing, they're hungry to grow, they're innovative. It's everywhere, it's not just Silicon Valley. So people have this great hand, but when people say MAGA, they're actually looking at people voting for Trump and they think they're voting, and they're basically scapegoating them, that you are like him. But I don't think they're voting for Trump because of his family values. And if you look, just take a step back, be honest. He's kind of right about NATO.
He's kind of right about everything. And like, they made him right.
Tax reform work. He's right about some of China. I don't like what he did.
I said China
Yeah, I understand. He made it right. And I don't like how he said things in Mexico. I don't like.
But he was right. Just because he said it in a way that was like probably not very
And I think people should be a little more respectful about those. And
sensitively.
you guys have people up there, you should always ask the why. Not like it's a binary thing, you're supporting Trump, you're not supporting Trump. Why are you supporting him?
75 million of your fellow Americans.
I agree. And the Democrats have done a pretty good job with the deplorables, hugging on to their Bibles and their beer and their guns. I mean, really, like, can we just stop that stuff and actually grow up and treat other people with respect and listen to them a little bit? And I do think the economy will affect. I think this negative talk about MAGA is going to hurt Biden's election campaign.
What?
Friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, weighed in,
That's
right?
cute.
For years, Barack Obama and Jamie Dimon were inseparable. The JP Morgan chair vocally supported Obama, and Obama frequently heaped praise on Dimon and acted to help JP Morgan. That's what makes these comments from Dimon about Trump and Trump supporters all the more remarkable. Indeed, I think this is one of those instances where you really see how superficial the sort of liberal pushback toward Trump is. It's just all about vibes. It's all about they thought he was in politics. They didn't like how he sounded. It was awkward for them at parties and their elite backgrounds. But when it comes down to it, when they realize that he maintained, frankly, the economic and political status quo that existed before him, suddenly all of those concerns go out the window. Jamie Dimon and Bernie Sanders ended up in these kind of weird online wars back in 2020 because Bernie Sanders was advancing substantive populist financial policy that would have actually hurt people like Jamie Dimon. He called them out for being fined $13 billion for mortgage fraud and illegally foreclosing on military families, bribing foreign officials, and receiving $416 billion in taxpayer money in the 2008 bailout. That was the kind of critique Bernie Sanders was making, and you're never going to see someone like Bernie and Jamie Dimon being best friends. But what you will see is someone like Jamie Dimon saying, hey, at the end of the day, Trump isn't that much of a threat to the status quo. I think he's frankly right about framing, as we talked about in an earlier segment, of not moving every conservative in under some MAGA umbrella to try to stigmatize them. And of course, he's right about Trump being right on trade and some of these other issues. But that has always been the case. And there have been politicians that weren't Donald Trump who were also right on trade, i.e. the kind of Bernie Trump mirror universes of each other that existed in the 2016 race. And someone like Jamie Dimon was never going to back a kind of America First trade policy coming out of someone like Bernie, because at the end of the day, it came with too much of a threat to his own bottom line. So I would just take all of this with a little bit of a grain of salt.
I thought I should remind our viewers what Donald Trump had to say about Jamie Dimon as recently as November 30th, like this past year. Highly overrated globalist Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, is quietly pushing another non-MAGA person, Nikki Haley, for president. I've never been a big Jamie Dimon fan, but had to live with this guy when he came begging to the White House. I guess I don't have to live with him anymore, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
So there's no affection on Trump's part, which speaks to this power Trump has, that everyone is expected to treat him with like very nicely, and you can't lash out at him in anger, or you're just like totally written off by all conservatives. But he can say whatever he wants about it anyway. It's real funny.
One other dynamic is
So Jamie Dimon is just has endorsed Nikki Haley and is pushing for Nikki Haley. So even the Jamie Dimon type peoples are really who you bring into the fold if you make Nikki Haley vice president.
Yes, this is all about establishment preservation. Talking about this under a partisan lens really misses the key story here. One other aspect that is worth noting is that in the last electoral cycle, and apparently in this electoral cycle as well, there were rumors that Jamie Dimon might be seeking a run for office. This is from a Reuters report of May of last year. Billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, he's everywhere. He's like the Forrest Gump of politics. And of course, Bill Ackman is the person who spearheaded the effort to get Claudine Gay ousted from Harvard University, and then later found out that his own wife was committing even worse plagiarism than what Claudine Gay has been accused of. He said Jamie Dimon should run for president back in last year, and Jamie Dimon responded saying, "I love my country, and maybe one day I'll serve my country in one capacity or another," he told Bloomberg News back then. So the kind of statement that he's making there, saying, "Hey, I'm a consensus person. I don't hate the MAGA people. I'm willing to bring the country together," definitely does smell to me like he's trying to lay the foundation for himself, not being the liberal bestie of Barack Obama or a bailout king who's a billionaire who took billions from American tax dollars after being part of a business that was part of the predatory campaign that caused the financial crisis to begin with. But hey, I'm a guy who understands progressive trade policies or more protectionist trade policies. I'm a guy who's willing to talk to idiot America. Don't notice the $1 billion in my bank account. Man of the people. That seems to be the pitch that he's giving here. And again, a radical divergence from what he was talking about during the Obama era.
Frankly, protectionist trade policies combined with bailouts for the super wealthy or for business in general is, for my mind, combining the worst of all the policies out there. I don't want to see more protectionist trade policies. I don't want to see more micromanaging of businesses or more red tape or any of that. I also don't want to see handouts or bailouts or preferential or special treatment. That's the problem with having these very wealthy corporate people involved in our politics, because obviously, I from a libertarian standpoint, I agree that I don't want the government to overly meddle in business, and I want to generally leave businesses alone in order to create a more prosperous conditions for everyone and jobs and everything that goes along with that. And for that reason, I think many, though not all Republicans, would be better choices than not all of Democrats. But I don't want to empower people who then are better connected and are able to just pilfer, as all of these CEOs were able to during the era of bailouts being only opposed by a sliver of the political class on both the right and the left. That's where your far left people and my far right people come together to oppose that. The duopoly. So it's
One
fuck is that?
Interesting aspect
Let's
of
look it up.
Jamie Dimon coming in the political spotlight right now is, of course, the reason he's been in the press most frequently over the last couple of years is because of Epstein stuff.
Right.
Remember, JP Morgan is where Epstein banked. It's being sued in the Virgin Islands for facilitating Epstein's sex crimes. When asked about this last year, Jamie Dimon told CNBC that the lawsuits against the bank related to his former client, the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, have impacted his brand equity a little bit. he said, quote, but we banked Jeffrey Epstein, and I'm so sorry that we did. I wish we hadn't. Had we known then what we know today, we obviously would have. And I think part of what's coming out of these Virgin Island disputes is how much people high up in the bank had very close personal
We see
relationships.
emails now from people at JP Morgan following Jeffrey Epstein's conviction being, doing his time.
Oh.
He didn't do his time, he was under house arrest, but following that kind of legal proceeding, eager to
Be paid to be in a race.
talking
Back in
about the very end, this is not Jamie Dimon himself. This is
That's
other
stupid.
people at JP Morgan. I think they're under a lot of scrutiny deservedly for their connection to him, which we will continue to follow on this show, More Rising, right after this.
Diesel. What? For successful living. Only the brave.
The World Economic Forum or the World Elite Forum, over 300 said elites from around the globe, meeting right now in Davos this week for the World Economic Forum. Who's on the list? Well, some of the attendees include U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who's already pleading for more money to fund the war against Russia. NATO Chief Stoltenberg is hinting that he plans on ramping up weapons provisions to Ukraine, saying that this is the way to peace.
Is that if we want that to happen, a peaceful, just and this war, the way to get it is more weapons to Ukraine. So the more credible we are in our military support, the more likely it is that the diplomats will succeed.
Stoltenberg tweeted yesterday, great to start the day in Davos by meeting President Zelensky. Despite a serious political situation, there is cause for optimism. Ukraine retains its independence. Ukrainians have rejected Russia and chosen the West, and Ukraine is closer to NATO than ever before.
Forum founder Klaus Schwab also made some remarks at the meeting. Let's hear some of what he had to say.
Those deeply transformative challenges, which are actually the cornerstone of our program, lead to uncertainty, generalized fear, and pessimism. They force us into a mode of short-term crisis management at the detriment of long-term strategic and sustainable solutions. This reactionary approach
It's gotta be sleepy.
undermines our collective faith in the future.
In the future?
At the end, here we losing the faith of our future. We risk to become much more ego-centered and on a national and individual level. To break this cycle, we need a paradigm shift. We must rebuild trust, and that's actually the theme of our meeting. We have to rebuild trust. Trust in our future, trust in our capacity to overcome challenges, and most importantly,
Silly peanuts.
So we covered Zelensky being at the World Economic Forum yesterday. I thought that was something to react to. Stoltenberg saying the path to peace is more weapons for Ukraine because that's the best way for diplomacy to take hold. Obviously, as we've discussed, there was a path to diplomacy very early on.
How do you make peace more bombs?
And instead, we continue to, by some reports, actually scuttled those discussions. The U.S. and the UK did, and then continued to send weapons to Ukraine. This whole, Ukraine remains free, it's still Ukraine, that's something to celebrate. Look, of course, I don't want Russia to take over Ukraine, and in fact, Russia's goal is not to subjugate the entire country, but to claim this Russian-speaking territory. And this idea that if we only give them another round of weapons is going to make is going to lead to some diplomatic breakthrough, I think is not plausible. It's not something anyone is believing at this point.
Or reasonable, or fucking in any way.
In some ways, the speaker
Mentally rational.
Way when they described it as a victory that Ukraine has become closer to the West
Leveled.
and the IMF.
Ukraine has
over
become
time.
leveled
Ultimately,
and
that is what
covered
this
with
talks
bodies.
about. It is about as if maybe you have a more of global economic order worldview of what's been happening here, whether or not Ukraine was going to come further under the influence of Western monetary policy and the kind of, dare I say, a kind of coercive or even neo-colonial way of controlling other countries and keeping them within our orbit through these international monetary organizations, as opposed to adopting a more Eastern-looking Russian focus here. And it seems like the victory in the eyes of these folks is whether or not NATO remains Western aligned, regardless of whether or not that's substantively in the interest of the people of Ukraine, or whether they would have democratically voted for that kind of a trajectory. And so there's something very telling about that speech when they say, well, however many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are dead, they started recruiting old men and women to the army. They're facing the hardest part of the winter right now, with funds having dried up from the United States of America. They're in no better bargaining position than they were a month after the war. But hey, the elites can still claim a victory because at the end of the day, their system of economic dominance remains intact.
Yeah. I mean, look, in a substantial portion of Ukraine, like there's nothing, states themselves are not sacred. If there's a substantial portion of Ukraine and its government that wants to be more Western focused, wants to be more NATO, European Union aligned, and that's what they want, then they should have that. They absolutely have that right. They should have that right to self-determination. And if there's part of the country, again, these are arbitrary lines that got redrawn 100 times, and there's part of the country that wants to be Eastern focused, is Russian speaking, is Russian culturally, and wants to be with Russia. There's nothing, again, sacred about the literal boundaries of the country. That seems like a better outcome for everyone. No one should be forced to share a political space with people they.
Unless you're one of these major parties, whether you're the United States or whether you're Russia, and your view is that you're losing ground and you're losing members of your coalition by allowing some portion of the world to actually engage in self-determination. I mean, we're seeing these kind of battles all over the world. We see it with the people of Mali finally ousting these remnants of French colonialism. You see it in the taxes that Haiti is still forced to pay and reparations to France of all weird twisted dynamics. You see that the way that the West maintains control of the world is sometimes often militaristic, but it also is through these mechanisms of financial control. And when those don't work, we see the spillover effects into wars like the ones we have in Ukraine that are so far attenuated in terms of how we've been managing it as outsiders from what the interests of Ukrainians are. It's honestly is very sad to watch, because at this point they have been dragged into the middle of a battle, which is very difficult for them to extricate themselves from without feeling like they've lost so much and gained so little in return. But that is a scenario that they're in precisely because the West, United States, and the UK scuttled negotiations in the month after the conflict emerged. And even before that, because the West courted and dangled the carrot of NATO membership, which was a known provocation for Russia, and did so anyway, because they're arguably their long-term financial
you bullied a bully.
The country was literally split apart by war.
Enabling it and then not giving it turned out to be the worst of both.
Like, you
worlds.
think you're
They
fucking
actually
hot tough shit, and then
properly
someone
made
actually finally
Ukraine
steps to you,
Barbados,
and then you put in this page.
The deterrent theory is that Russia would not have attacked.
And you look behind you to see if like fucking then your friends are fucking behind you, and they're all gone.
Middle ground where
So-
we're saying it could maybe happen, but we're not actually, NATO is not actually obligated to defend Ukraine, allowed Russia to then attack it without provoking the level of reprisals of the U.S. military government, the U.S. military actually intervening rather than just sending aid. So some of the members at the meeting have called for a new world era, I believe. Let's watch some of that.
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders.
I think it's a little bit more about a transition of eras, than a transition of orders, but the two are kind of cousins of one another. The reason I brought the distinction is because I don't think the international order built after 1945 is going to replace wholesale with some new order. It will obviously evolve as it has evolved multiple times over the decades since 1945. But I do think in a more sharp and distinctive way, we are moving into a new era, and that's what I
talked about in my remarks, that we are, the post-Cold War era has come to a close. We're at the start of something new. We have the capacity to shape what that looks like. And part of it will be many of the core principles and core institutions of the existing order.
Commentator Luke Rudkowski wrote on X, the Davos Bilderberg members want to create a new world order. Where have I heard that before? Obviously, referring to what has been labeled a conspiracy, the New World Order conspiracy theory.
It's not a theory.
Is a conspiracy theory, but we do year after year see these elites, these government people who run governments getting together to decide on vast foreign policy and economic matters.
We need to learn the difference between conspiracy and conspiracy theory.
Is this actually democratic? And at the same time,
Because
democracy is the most important thing.
there's a lot of conspiracies that end up being not theories. They're just conspiracies.
So we're not talking about this specifically today because I am planning to do a radar on it tomorrow, so viewers can hold me accountable since I'm announcing it ahead of time. I try never to do that. But about specifically the speech implications, there are so many. They did this last year. Brian Stelter moderated a panel on the threat of misinformation. This year, the World Economic Forum ranked misinformation as the #1 global threat above warfare and climate change and pandemics and everything else. Misinformation. And then they were having a panel on it this year. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. But again, just this, yes, of course, the spread of false information can be a concerning thing, but when they have it in their head that it's misinformation or something.
Yeah, but see, you're dealing with people who were like, oh my god, a colored television. The first time televisions were around. Then you show them fucking too much Star Wars, and they all start to think that they're in Star Wars. Like, their brains can't handle it. They think they're like in a movie, and they have way too much money, so it's like shit is a movie, and then not realizing that
outlier because of the First Amendment. Say, yeah, you guys have to figure out the First Amendment. It stops you from censoring all this bad.
Are kind of important to other people.
Yeah, well, people will have to return tomorrow to tune in for that radar, which Robbie has absolutely promised to write. You cannot deny on.
All right, that does it for us.
The fuck was that?
On Rising, as I promised this radar, so we'll have that and lots more news and some good interviews, and we hope you tune in.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. For those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you later. Bye-bye. Some of the world's wealthiest figures are currently in the Swiss town of Davos for the World Economic Forum's meeting that started yesterday. The online commentators have claimed that the event involves a group of elites manipulating global events for their own gain. According to AP, experts say what was once a conspiracy theory found throughout the internet's underground has now hit the mainstream.
The theme of the meeting in 2020 was called The Great Reset, which envisioned how changes could be implemented to build a more sustainable future. This theme has been referenced by many well-known names, including Fox News' Tucker Carlson and Sandy Hook denier Alex Jones, who largely view the plan as an elite conspiracy to consolidate world power and implement control over society. But Twitter Files journalist Michael Schellenberger tweeted yesterday, spokespersons for the World Economic Forum say the Great Reset, eating insects instead of meat, and you'll own nothing and be happy are conspiracy theories, but they're not. In fact, all of them originated at Davos and from the World Economic Forum's own website. Now, WEF leading those, of course. This article that was reportedly on the website in 2016 and has since been deleted says, welcome to 2030, I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. I wanted to talk about this because, so this is getting the kind of mainstream media spin of, oh, look at all these people criticizing Davos and the World Economic Forum. They're spreading misinformation and conspiracy theories. If you're upset about this, you are yourself a conspiracy theorist. It's all just conspiracies. And yes, if you get into the granular details, are some people saying things about the World Economic Forum. They're not representing its views correctly. I mean, it doesn't even have views. It is a gathering of heads of state and business leaders and influential people from all over the world who have a variety of different agendas and don't internally agree. So there's not one agenda they're putting forth.
Mhm.
But talk about in terms of environmentalism, in terms of state surveillance, state capacity, the kinds of governments run by these very people, what they'll be able to do to you, is it kind of social credit score system, tracking, the kind of nudging. It's for your health, it's for your own good. It's a very kind of soft dystopian. Again, as I said last time we talked about this, some of these ideas might be fine. It is also fine to be critical of it, to not like that you're not invited, that it's a secret meeting, semi-secret meeting of elites, and you might not like all these policies. Maybe they'll involve outsourcing and maybe it's too deferential to China's new hegemony, all that stuff. That is fine. It is not a conspiracy theory to object to that.
No, it's definitely not. And like, I think it is healthy for, look, I remember not so long ago living in a world where there was kind of more of an open embrace of and almost admiration for a certain kind of elitism. I think coming out of the Bush era and into the Obama era, there was the idea that we're going to leave like the dumb Neanderthals behind and that all the problems in the world could be solved by the right technocratic brain that went to Harvard and attended Davos, right? And that was part of the appeal of Obama. And I think the Obama years disabused a lot of people of the notion that that was going to be the fix. However, I think the part of it that's a little frustrating from a left perspective is, more people should be interrogating why it is that the kinds of solutions that are coming out of Davos do seem so dystopian for many of us. For those of us who believe that there is a climate crisis, who understand that there have been famines and droughts as a consequence of environmental change, and also because of war driving immigration across the country, all kinds of displacement, a third of Pakistan underwater this year, wildfires in California. These are things that are happening, whatever you want to attribute them to. Saying, well, obviously we have to do some planning about how to maintain resources, how to grow enough food to feed the world, and all of the other kinds of things. The war in Ukraine obviously impacted grain supplies, etc. Now, why is it that the solutions always seem to be we all eat bugs? Part of it is that the changes that would be more equitable and less severe for the broader public come at the expense of the very, very wealthy. Are you going to be able to graze endless rounds of beef so that all the people who eat a steak every day for lunch can continue to eat a steak every day for lunch? Or are we going to turn some of that pasture land into agricultural land so that the rest of us don't have to eat bugs? And these are the kind of trade-offs that aren't being discussed in the pernicious motives of corporations and people who are very, very elite who want to aggregate all of the wealth at the very, very top without making any sacrifices themselves. While we're all at the back of the Snowpiercer train eating bug gelatin.
Ugh.
So that is a real problem here. And I hope some of this stuff moves.
I'd call that a fucking problem.
Crunchy green liberals who want you to eat bugs. No, the people at that Congress aren't crunchy green liberals. The people who know that there's a limit on their economic oil investments because these are not infinite
They have
sources.
crunchy liberal social views and
Well, even worse than that.
enrich corporate economic.
Yeah, I think that some of them don't even have those social views, but they do use those social views to launder their bad practices. And this has been happening with the weaponization of identity politics. This is happening by putting a woke
Happy foot.
flag on a lot of things that are really pernicious. But again, I don't think it's not the wokeness that's the problem. It's not black people or trans people or gay people or anything that's the problem. It's people like this who exploit the existence of those groups and legitimate historical persecution that they've had to endure to launder a bunch of same old corporate practices. To that end, the charity organization Oxfam, which focuses on alleviating global poverty, made a plea to the leaders at Davos that the number of billionaires should be reduced by half by 2030 in a report titled Survival of the Richest. Twitter CEO Elon Musk weighed in on the WEF's plan to incorporate, quote, environmental, social, and governance criteria into its investment strategy, clipping that the S stands for satanic. What do you make of this? Is it just a billionaire being big mad at billionaires have a target on their back? Or is there a point here?
I don't know what's like satanic. It's that is a kind of a type of criticism I see from some on the right to impute to the elites that it's all like it's literal Satanism or literal. Hillary Clinton is slipping down, drinking the blood of children, that kind of thing. Now, to say, then people don't take you seriously when you say that because that sounds crazy.
Yeah, because it's fucking batshit crazy. Like, it's not crazy, it's batshit crazy. Ridiculous.
Actually engaged in sex trafficking, sexual abuse of underage. Like, every now and then, the what sounds like, well, that's too crazy, your criticism, that's too far out there, is true. Every now and then it is true. But mostly, no. So they're not, they're not sacrificing children in pagan rituals. They are discussing policies that they think would be good for society and would especially be good for them and making more money for their corporations and enriching the governments represented. And some of those policies might be worth implementing, but we all get to decide. America is a democratic republic where we have elected representatives. You don't have to go.
Okay, do you decide to starve or do you decide to eat bugs? Which do you prefer? That's a decision.
Let's interrogate that. Let's interrogate the idea that we're a democracy because
well, I do. That's what I'm not saying.
Yeah.
They are.
But it's obviously some edict that comes out from Davos or from Oxfam. Nobody's following. These are all advisory or whatever. But the conversation about how many billionaires there should be. So notably, the number of billionaires that exist has gone up exponentially. There are 500 new billionaires mentioned during the 2020 economic crisis, which a lot of people found to be disturbing given how much the rest of the world was suffering. There's a heightened awareness of the fact that there is a relationship between how many people are poor and how many people are rich, and these things are happening in tandem. And when you look at root causes, there are a lot of things that people point to. For example, the average CEO pay versus worker pay has exploded over the last 40 years or so. In the middle of the last century, in the 1950s, 60s, it was something like a 1-to-30 ratio. The earnings of the CEO versus worker. Now it's closer to 1 to 300. It's actually closer to 1 to 400 ratio. We've seen jobs that get received. We've seen workers get a smaller share of the pie. We've seen union density lower, and so workers can't advocate for the wages that they used to be able to earn. And so you're getting more and more wealth aggregated at the top. Now, that's no surprise then, maybe, that a wealth tax, when polled, is very, very popular. We don't get a wealth tax in terms of legislation, however, perhaps because people like Elon Musk and other billionaires who give enormous amounts to do presidential campaign, Joe Biden took more billionaire money than anybody else in the race, including Donald Trump, have no incentive to actually do anything about having the number of billionaires, or at least limiting the idea that billionaires are able to extract so much wealth at a period of crisis.
Yeah, I mean, here you and I will probably have some real disagreements. I don't have any desire to have fewer billionaires like in a vacuum. Like the number of billionaires there are doesn't bother me. If people are making billions of dollars legitimately, not with subsidies, not with cheats, and there's a lot of that going on, and we've both agreed already getting rid of that. If they're doing it by providing value to society, by providing food and clothing and services that people want to buy, and that's how they get rich, that's fine with me. You probably disagree with this. I don't think just because more people have a lot more, sometimes that means other people have less. Doesn't always. I mean, the global poverty rate is dramatically, right? It hasn't been largely because of the third world getting better, etc. Maybe there's been some stagnation in our own country, the developed world. By and large, the period of extreme growth in the billionaire class has not coincided with massive global poverty.
It takes very little to raise someone who's living on $1 a day, $2 a day. It doesn't require that much distribution.
I can hear $2, but $1 a day, I don't think that's possible. That's my phone. I didn't fart.
Right, I don't mean to minimize that accomplishment, but that doesn't undermine the reality that the wealth aggregation that we've seen over the last 50 years is the direct result of economic policy. People didn't just start inventing cooler products that consumers wanted to consume more. There are real economic underpinnings to how this kind of thing happens. So again, if everyone could be a billionaire, obviously I'd love that.
But also, billionaires under feudalism, right? Where there's everyone's, a couple people have land but don't have anything like the
Wanna be in the cover of Forbes magazine.
And everyone else is really poor, and it's just society's terrible.
That's actually a very good example. I don't know how we would many gold coins or whatever. He says it's really local. He said that those huge aggregations of wealth among very, very few people and families is exactly the system that made people like, Jan Foster's called it a techno-feudalism, I believe. The system that we're heading to right now is these tech giants aggregating all of this wealth and power. But they're using Twitter files to control democracy, to advance their own financial interests, to suppress criticism of China if your business is there, as people have accused Elon Musk of doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's worth discussing, and I'm glad Davos is opening up that particular conversation. I just hope that it gets a little deeper than accusing people of, drinking too much, wanting to put what's out there.
Original fans, fuck yeah.
Lorsque l'installation frappe, rétablir avec plaisir on sentir mieux rapidement.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced the upcoming World Economic Forum being held in Davos next week, taking the opportunity to note that Florida is not open to embracing any policy ideas that might come from the meeting. Let's watch.
They do this thing in Davos. They're doing it next week. All these elites come in, the World Economic Forum. Basically, their vision is they run everything and everybody else is just like a serf, like a peasant. They say they're going after energy, ESG, all these other things. And you see the Biden administration wants to nix gas stoves. Are you kidding me? Like, I want gas stove. I mean, imagine
I want to get a gas stove now just because you guys are saying that.
Power right away, but we're able to turn on. So you cannot go down this road. But that's exactly.
Oh, who do you think has been cutting our power ever since we were like, we want to go nuclear because it's gonna be cheaper. And Putin was like, you really shouldn't do that.
He was referring to the Chinese Communist Party there.
And they were like, well, we can do what we want. It's like, yeah, but we really shouldn't do that. Fucking all of a sudden, our power sucks. Fucking love Putin. That guy's fucking hilarious. Quite the sense of humor, that man.
Why political move, it's always healthy to make an attack against elites, and certainly this is the most elite of elite bunches gathering here. And that, of course, there is always this kind of what seems, from my perspective, to be a little bit of not quite related culture war-ish jazz mixed in there with the gas stove. Look, I love a gas stove as much as anybody. It takes my electric stove forever to heat up. And my omelets haven't been the same since I moved into my new apartment.
Oh, you went from gas to electric?
I went from gas to electric.
That's terrible.
It's also true that 12.7% of all
everyone goes from gas to electric, idiot.
Buy gas stoves, and people should be informed about the health risks. Yeah, the health consequences of gas stoves are really just now being understood and reported on. So it's a serious issue. Maybe you don't care, maybe your kids are grown, but other people care. I'm not saying that to necessarily be a yes, but pretending like there's not downsides to this or that it's just a random draconian edict coming down from on high is also a little absurd. So what do you make of this kind of political move from DeSantis to say, hey, I'm anti-Davos?
I think it's a sign of the ascendancy of a kind of right and left populism, the fusion of that, which is very anti-Davos mindset. The World Economic Forum brings together all these heads of state, former heads of state, current heads of state, and corporate partners, powerful elites, who all have a lot of similar ideas and similar goals on economics, on a lot of climate stuff. Since COVID, there's been a lot of how can we use the COVID emergency to the Great Reset, is what it's called. How can society be better planned from here on out? And unlike Ron DeSantis, I don't think every idea that would come out of this meeting will necessarily be bad. But I think the concerns are well founded, which is that it's a little bit of the technocratic elite has a lot of blind spots, is not very down with democratic decision making, and also not very down necessarily with civil liberties, because those can get in the way. I think they saw that with COVID, that people don't want to be required necessarily to take vaccines and other things. You don't want to be required to wear masks forever.
Especially not when like I'm not allowed to put toxins in my own body. Like
confounds their ability to kind of like plan and organize society.
Like I feel like if like any kind of drug consumption was like,
which is the whole kind of global. I think.
Well, if I can kill yourself with drugs, go ahead, kill yourself with drugs. But then how would the money fucking my government profit off of the MAID fucking program?
Brought in some of the Chinese
Just saying.
government's closed-mindedness toward criticism and free speech is actually being imported into not because of Western culture, but Western decision-making with our governments and our businesses. People self-censor, institutions self-censoring in order to not get priced out of the Chinese market. This is very bad.
This is what the point that Bach is.
Oh my God.
Elon Musk in China and because of his factories.
Or the NBA, or
Disney.
Activision Blizzard, or any number of U.S. celebrities or political figures or institutions.
Very dizzy.
It's a weird situation because they have the right to do. They have the free speech right to not want any criticism of China, but they're doing it because the authoritarian government that we have no control over wants that.
Yeah, and money talks. LeBron James gets a talking to from the NBA when he makes some anti-China comments, and people care about their contracts and how much they're able to earn. And that's, I think, precisely why this particular aggregation of human beings at Davos is concerning, because when you look at what aligns them, what interests they all share, it's very elite financial interests, and it's not the interest of the overwhelming majority of people who live on this planet.
And it speaks to a concern that I think a lot of our viewers have, a lot of independent-minded people on right and left, which is that actually the elites have so much in common. They say they're Republican, they say they're Democrat, but there's so much agreement, there's so much social cooperation, so much enjoyment of each other's company. Right. You're not in that meeting. You're not, in those smoke-filled rooms. They're not smoke-filled. I don't think. At Davos, they're definitely not smoke-filled.
What?
Unfortunately, there's no smoking in those rooms. So it's
I don't even know what
it's
this
shielded
happened.
from view, and I think it presents certain things. Obviously, you can go too far and be a little conspiratorial about how bad it is or something. I think some of their economic ideas are probably good, but should be embraced or allowed or be voted on. And it's still up to individual countries. Like the U.S., we're our own country. We have a respect for civil liberties, not just respect, but legally required under our Constitution. So you can't just say, oh, we all went off to Davos and decided this is a good policy, now it's going to be imposed on the people of the U.S. or Canada or Mexico or any country. No, we can decide.
Right, but that's I think the
fucking
concern people
super
have is that
nice.
this stuff gets snuck into the back door. I mean, we just had this 4,000 pages of legislation that
Champion
was
Fox.
rushed right before Christmas, and nobody read. And this is one of the asks from the 20 Freedom Caucus people who were just holding up the speakership vote last week, and that's one of the asks that they secured, which is that they have to have single issue bills, or at least there has to be a single issue title on the bill. There's a little bit of warbliness about what they were actually given.
Imagine if it was debated, actually, right, instead of at the last minute, snuck into a document that is far too long for anyone to read it, and then you have to vote on it immediately, and you have to vote yes, because the whole country's economy will collapse if you just all of a sudden didn't have a budget. So nobody can vote against it. Still they do. It was going to actually, if the vote against it was actually going to succeed, no one could vote for it.
Exactly.
But it's so unserious. Yeah. Because some of the stuff in that bill should not be voted
What
for.
the fuck was Calvin Klein socks?
It should be rejected, but you don't get to do that.
Honestly.
They cram it all in. They put it up there at once. It's
And
so
they don't
bad.
give you time to read it. So another thing, one of the asks that they secured was, I think, a 72-hour period before a bill was passed where people have an opportunity. I mean, it's still a very short time to read all of those pages with any kind of precision or depth, but I think they're moving in the right direction. There's some important populist asks that came through that are getting really underanalyzed and underappreciated by the liberal media.
Well, previously, the vast majority of congressional representatives in both parties had no say or input in what was going into that.
Right.
It's the speaker and a handful of other powerful people in both parties get together and decide, and then you have to vote for it.
Yeah, that 4,000-page document we're talking about was a Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi special. That is a bipartisan, secretive, non-transparent special. So it's interesting that there are these parallels between the problem with Congress and the problem with Davos being a lack of transparency and democracy.
Yeah, that's why we always have to hold the elite feet to be fired. More rising right after this.
stay with us.
Coleslaw.
Are they saying the quiet part out loud? Well, speaking at the World Economic Forum, editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, Emma Tucker, bemoaned the eradication of public trust in media and how journalists now actually have to show how they do their work. What a concept.
If you go back, really not that long ago, as I say, we owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. If it said it in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, then that was a fact. Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying. So it's no longer good enough for us just to say, this is what happened, or here's this is the news. We have to explain, almost like explain our working. So readers expect to understand how we source stories. They want to know how we go about getting stories. We have to sort of lift the bonnet, as it were, and in a way that newspapers aren't used to doing, and explain to people what we're doing. We need to be much more transparent about how we go about collecting news.
Elite socks.
Weirdly self-aware, not self-aware at the same time. But she's right that the mainstream media have been gatekeepers for a very long time. The online, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter, whether it's the blogosphere, dynamic has disrupted the bloggers and gatekeepers that used to uniquely decide what kind of news and information the broader public saw. The proliferation even of news channels and mainstream news diversified that a little bit over the course of the last 30 years or so. And now we live in a place where there's a lot of information out there, and that's why we have this intense focus on the misinformation crisis. It's not about the quality of the information and the realization that the gatekeepers no longer have the ability to block the way they used to and to curate exactly what news makes it through.
Yeah, everything she was saying there is descriptively correct. The question is, you're trying to read her tone. It's a little bit like, she's saying this, and that's bad.
Right.
Whereas I would say everything she just said, and that has some downsides, but it has also a tremendous amount of positives that the media now feels, media institutions now feel pressure to explain how they arrive at their conclusions, how reporting works, why they choose to do the work that they're doing, and that they face robust competition from all corners of the media landscape, that there's a much broader and diversified ecosystem, including social media, including video, TV, radio, podcasts, and on and on and on, that there is no, there's no, journalism, it was always wrong for journalists to see themselves as this elite credentialed profession, whereas you went to an elite school and you got a very special degree, and that made you now qualified to weigh in on affairs of state and the matters of the day. Actually, any journalism is a craft. It's a practice. It's like weightlifting or something. You get stronger, you get better. The more you do it, the more you do reporting. Everyone is capable of doing it. People like Julian Assange have shown that. So there's no special category of people. Anyone who works to publish information that the public ought to know that's in the public interest is engaged in the work of journalism, and that is a good thing.
Not anymore.
The technology exists. That was the major innovation. That it used to just be
like, it's cute that anyone thinks that he's gonna get out of jail. Guy's never leaving prison. Like,
anyone can do it, and I think that's better. And it has. Yes, it has made the conversation wilder, and you have to be careful because there's a lot of wrong, false, misleading information out there, what the fact checkers and the misinformation people are always worrying about. But the issue is there used to be false, bad information produced by the mainstream journalism institutions, and they didn't compete with each other as much. So they weren't calling.
that's why they'd have to have redacted.
Now we have this dynamic where there's an entire right-wing media apparatus, there's an entire left-wing media apparatus, there's the mainstream media, and there's all these platforms, and they're all fighting all the time. So you have to decide for yourself.
These socks say Monday.
You think is right, but that's better when it's all just a handful of companies saying the same thing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't entirely poo-poo the concern of how do you understand what the truth is. I think you're right to say that wasn't a concern that was born fully grown out of Zeus's head overnight in the advent of social media. It has always been the case, But these days, I do think there is perhaps more of an opportunity for bad faith actors to put stuff out there they know not to be true, just simply because the economy is such that everybody has an opportunity to put everything out there. And I do think it's worth having conversations about how to have media literacy. It's something that needs to be taught in schools more. How to assess what sources are. How to, be wary, especially in the age of AI, about manipulated images and deepfakes and those kinds of things. We've seen so much conflicting evidence, for example, obviously come out of Gaza, where you have newsrooms making the choice, an editorial choice to say to their writers, you must describe death tolls, let's say, as Hamas death tolls, or to describe Houthi fighters as Iranian-backed fighters, when there isn't the same kind of effort to say this is a U.S.-backed Israeli force, or to say these are IDF numbers or statements or whatever information is coming out of another party that obviously has its own interests and is self-interested, as all parties are. Right now, there's a story going on coming out of Australia where there's been a no confidence vote for ABC Australian Broadcasting leadership, partly because they forced their employees to not use the word genocide, for example. So I'm also really interested within legacy media, the internal fights that folks are having about these standards that are coming from the top down, but don't seem to be dictated by necessarily journalistic integrity, or saying we're going to let the editorial board say this, and these employees can say this, and these employees can say that. But having these top-down edicts, how can these institutions really lay any claim to any kind of journalistic integrity or objectivity when they're just pressing their own bottom line as those people are across these different platforms?
What did they say? They told the employees not to say the word genocide
in
their reporting, or what?
Yes, the head, I think his name is Anderson, gave this following edict. He told the staff there had been a recent directive that the word genocide cannot be used to describe the Israeli military campaign in Gaza, even when quoting someone, without it being, quote, upwardly referred to a manager, but that, quote, we can talk to any of the victims of the Hamas October 7 massacre, which we should, and we put that to air. Quote, it's only ever one side of things that really has motivated me and I want to speak about. This is from a reporter who's talking to the press and frustrated about it being lions. He said staff were also often, quote, thrown under the bus by management, and staff were beginning to self-censor as a result.
So the interesting thing that's coming up at Davos, obviously, where they were talking about this media reality, I did a radio last week that if you missed it, you should check out, about the misinformation concerns specifically. They always do a panel every year about misinformation now, and it got ranked actually as the #1 short-term global threat. The experts, the kind of people who go to Davos, very concerned about what you said, the ability of people to consume misleading news or misleading images or AI generated stuff. Of course, so far from looking at studies, people aren't as easily fooled as you might expect. There's a lot of more media literacy will always be good. I'm not saying I'm against it by any stretch of the imagination, but most of the research I've seen suggests that overwhelming majority of people can't tell. Don't share news that is like absolutely made up, like fake images or something. It's a small number of people who do it. Tends to be older Americans. Younger people are very adept at seeing through that kind of stuff.
That's hard for me to believe when you had, I'm sorry to keep bringing this up, when the 40-day baby story gets so much traction that even the President of the United States of America was repeating it repeatedly.
Ridiculous.
Even though we subsequently had reporting that his own staff warned him against bringing up that particular quote. And we see it still being bandied about. There was a reference to multiple beheaded babies in the Israeli Defense by the ICJ just a week or two ago. So, I mean, I take your point that it might be more overblown than people will say, but especially when there's a lot of power and interest and money behind a certain claim, I think actually some random grandma saying, drinking honey cures cancer on the internet is much less pernicious than when you have governments, for instance, advancing certain narratives.
So that's always been the case. Like now we have, the scrutiny of claims Biden makes about Gaza or about any other subject get shredded on social media, and then they get promoted too. But it used to be just uncritical promotion. Now there are people who can undermine the things that the propaganda.
That's a fair point. I guess I'd just say, if the core, percent of the core problem with misinformation spreading, I think I'm frankly more concerned about it coming from the top. With the internet people debunking it doesn't help if we don't have the same platform of the President of the United States of America going before the entire nation and doubling down and tripling down. I do think
the president always had that platform. Is what I'm saying. Now we have platforms.
Yeah, I don't disagree. This is obviously not a critique. I'm just saying there is a misinformation problem, but it's coming from the top.
Sure. More rising right after this.
Okay there, Robbie. Sure. Stand back there.
Investigative journalist Li Feng wrote yesterday, Epstein sent many rambling emails suggesting projects with Bill Gates. Asked for presentations for a new Gates-backed foundation, $100 million minimum investment expanding on exchanging prior Gates-related interests like vaccines and maternal care. In one of those emails from February 25th, 2011, Epstein reportedly wrote, Gates guy here today, no reporters, I took care of that, stay calm and focused. We need to speak. I am staying until very late tonight. Seeing Gates read donor on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, set aside for 2-3 hours to discuss exactly this.
This comes as more information on Epstein's dealings are coming to light amid JP Morgan's fresh accusations over ties to the accused sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, so these are filings from this JP Morgan Virgin Islands lawsuit. So just more and more emails from JP Morgan officials, Epstein talking about it, just the all the influential, important people with lots of money that Epstein was connecting to government officials at the island, to the bank as well. His ongoing kind of relationship with Gates, which is these messages to Gates people are 2011. So that's after he's already a known sex offender. He's been convicted. He got his house arrest or whatever kind of deal he got for sexual misconduct with others. So you can't say, oh, I didn't know. It was known. It was known by then. There's some joking about Miley Cyrus, who at the time of this is 15.
Yup.
At the time.
Her dad's fucking gross.
Again, a clear inclination of an awareness of exactly the kind of thing Epstein does.
Yes, sir, but he's not the only one.
I think it's a bit of a lens into what the world is like for bankers in America at the very high
Nope. So far off fucking targeted.
You have one from a Mary or those.
You're a dumb bitch. I hate this fucking girl.
Person saying, obviously they're at a party. This is, really late at night. The first email is about 8:30. This has turned into a cheesy broker fest. Totally not cool. The only cool people here are at Glenn's table, same as bat mitzvah. So maybe they've known each other for some time. The response is at 1:20 a.m. Epstein there with Miley Cyrus. And so this is like official JP Morgan emails where this exchange is happening. Was Epstein actually there with Miley Cyrus? We don't know. But the fact that they made the joke shows that these bankers on their JP Morgan emails are comfortable joking about the billionaire being out with young girls.
They were comfortable joking about a lot of really sketchy stuff. We've read these emails in the past. Talking about who's your favorite, like Disney princess.
Ew.
It suggests again
Ew.
with the kind of
that's fucking disturbing as fuck.
Epstein was interested in and had already been convicted for. Would eventually be arrested for again. Right up until the very end, I talked about this several times, but I think it's always worth bringing up, including. Given her, recent crusade, the higher media profile she has sought for herself as part of the pushback from Democrats on Twitter files and RFK Jr. Stacey Plaskett, the delegate of the Virgin Islands, has been front and center at these hearings, accusing, Matt Taibbi of perjury, accusing RFK Jr. of anti-Semitism. Stacey Plaskett, delegate of the Virgin Islands, trying to get Jeffrey Epstein at her fundraisers as recently as 2018, I believe, the year before he was arrested again and then died in allegedly because of suicide.
Allegedly.
And, this was someone with full knowledge and awareness of his wrongdoing, was courting his influence, his access to funds and to important wealthy people.
Right. Plaskett, who originally said that she wasn't really aware that he was donating. She was completely unaware of his donations to her campaign, which, then she had to say in deposition last month.
It's just a lie.
Yeah, she was directly
Yeah, you can see the emails from her team saying, "Oh, he's going to be there, right? Just make sure he gets a personal invite."
Not just for the political dealings, but was an attorney at the tax firm that worked with Jeffrey Epstein. So even before she ran for public office, she knew Jeffrey Epstein. But then there's obvious documents where she's asking that he be invited to the events. She was clearly aware, most likely directly had been speaking with Jeffrey Epstein.
And Jeffrey Epstein, had his own agenda for the Virgin Islands. He wanted the sex offender policies of the Virgin Islands changed. Wonder why that could be. He was paying for some government officials, I think, schooling for their kids. This is, and this is something I've, again, mentioned when we talk about this lawsuit, but because the lawsuit is from Virgin Islands to JP Morgan, but it seems pretty clear that a lot of the government officials of the Virgin Islands were very much complicit in the exact kind of nefarious, we'll find out if it's illegal, who knows, but very icky behavior that they're going after JP Morgan for their relationship to Jeffrey Epstein, that they are complicit as well. So whatever they recoup from JP Morgan as a result of this lawsuit, if this is just going to build like a nicer governor's mansion or something or whatever it is in the Virgin Islands, that would be pretty ridiculous because they're all over this too. So it is the victims of Jeffrey Epstein who need to be made whole again. Not powerful people who were well aware of this pattern of abuse for 15 years.
Or maybe, did a job of passing some anti-corruption legislation. Not only was Epstein donating to Plaskett's campaign, there was an email where an aide wrote to Epstein to confirm that a $13,000 corporate donation planned for the Democratic Party, not the Plaskett campaign, would be made, quote, for the benefit of Stacey Plaskett. So this exceeds the amount that you can donate in an election cycle to an individual candidate. And this shows the kind of shady dealing that goes on between very rich donors like Jeffrey Epstein and PACs or political campaigns, right? You're circumventing FEC regulations by saying, I'm giving this money to the Democratic Party because I can give an unlimited amount, but I'm letting you know that this needs to go to the benefit of Stacey Plaskett, which is not a decision the donor can make. That's a decision that the party needs to make of what to do with that money. And so that's a pretty damning facet of this whole expose as well, of what's going on in the Virgin Islands. And, she's a delegate to Congress and she's risen to a pretty prominent position as well.
Yeah, she's been all over, as I said, the Twitter Files hearing. She grilled Tybee Schellenberger. She accused Tybee of making up, of getting things wrong and way overplayed her hand there. And then at this RFK Jr. hearing last week, she was one of the people, saying things that I don't think, I think are exaggerations and mischaracterizations of what RFK Jr. said. She's positioning herself as very much part of the Democratic, establishment, pushing back on people who are questioning government abuse related to social media and speech and all sorts of other things. But she has some things to be looked at for.
Yeah, podcaster Joe Rogan actually suggested that Bill Clinton was blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein, who hung up a painting of Clinton in his home. Let's watch this.
What?
Why do you think Epstein had that giant picture of Bill Clinton in a dress?
Oh, yeah.
Do you know that picture? That thing?
Epstein's taste in art was not great. Like, if you look at the
No, that was great. That painting is like, I got you, bitch. That's what that is.
Oh, right.
You got.
I'm going to see if I can put the painting up on screen. What do you think about the blackmailing of Bill Clinton?
So I love the way the response goes by his guest there on the podcast of Joe Rogan, because it wasn't like, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton were obviously very close for him to have this painting commissioned. It was, taste in art's pretty bad. I would want Bill Clinton in a dress on the wall. It's a hilarious.
Well, it's not. So let's put it. So there it is.
Yeah.
So it's not actually. I don't think. So Bill Clinton. He didn't pose for this. Somebody else posed for it, and it was painted, and then they just painted it to look like Bill Clinton's face. So the idea that I don't think this is evidence of that he's being black. Like it was public knowledge. This painting. Well, I guess it later became public knowledge, but it's not. He wasn't trying to. Bill Clinton was like trying to prevent this painting from getting out or something. Like he didn't pose for it. It was just. So it's evidence of blackmail. I don't know.
I love you.
No, but hilarious.
Hilarious.
Hilarious. It's giving, it doesn't sound like because the client is Jeffrey Epstein, but paint me like one of your French girls.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Eve to me is basically freedom. It's a giant open universe where folks, it's happening. We're here. Dangerous Ideas. I'm Lee Camp. Thanks for being here. I will be reading you today several portions of Hamas's statement on what went down on October 7th. They have finally put out a long description of what exactly happened on October 7th. And where it differs from Israeli point of view or Israeli propaganda on what they say has happened on October 7th. Now, whether you decide after I read these things that Hamas is lying, or the IDF is lying, or Israel is lying, or whoever's lying, or the U.S. is lying, whether you decide any of those things, it doesn't really change the fact that a genocide is taking place right now. So if you can believe all Israel's propaganda, all of it, all of the time, and still go, oh, but also genocide. So this is not to say that this, reading Hamas's statement changes the reality after October 7th. It doesn't. It's still genocide either way. But I like to get to the source of the truth. And that is why I'm going to bring you what the mainstream media generally will not bring you. One of the things they will not bring you is Hamas's statements, at least most of it, what exactly went down October 7th. And you're going to find some of it shocking, I guarantee you. And I'll leave it to you as to what you choose to believe, which side you believe is relaying more of the truth. You will get to decide that on your own, which is kind of part of getting to the truth, is hearing all sides, which is why I'm bringing this up in mainstream media won't bring it. Anyway, I'm going to be doing that, but I thought let's start off, and don't forget to hit thumbs up, hit share, please click on the comment section, leave a comment, say hello, say hey folks, fun times we live in, aren't they? Fun times. When every day is a new genocide. But I want to bring you this first. A clip of our national security spokesman, John Kirby, man of killing the people. And this is from a few days ago, but it basically is him admitting the U.S. perpetrated genocide. He seems he kind of accidentally admits it, but if you listen to the wording, wait a second. Anyway, on this.
This is the White House's view that the elimination of Hamas is an attainable goal. What we say before is, well, first of all, the Israelis is their military goals. That we absolutely believe they have the right and responsibility to eliminate the threat that Hamas poses to the Israeli people. Now, they have said for themselves, Peter, that the way they're going about that is really targeting infrastructure, tunnels and command control nodes, as well as he didn't.
Now, first of all, I just want to say that's bullshit. They're not just targeting infrastructure and leadership. They are targeting
hospitals
and journalists and medics and UN workers. So the idea that they're going after infrastructure, oh really? Did Did the 100 UN workers you've murdered, did they all look like a pipeline? Did the 100 journalists you murdered, did they all appear to be a police station? Is that what it was? That's bullshit. But anyway, that's not the point. That's not why I'm playing the
With targeting infrastructure, tunnels and transport nodes as well as leadership. It is not that unusual or different approach to nuclear right now. And places like Iraq and Afghanistan going back.
He just said it is a similar tactic to what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan.
You fucking destroy it.
A full-scale dictionary definition, according to the Holocaust Fund, Holocaust Memorial Fund website. Dictionary definition genocide. And here's John Kirby, the national spokesman for National Security Council, saying that we did the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Idiot.
You were saying we perpetrated genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan? Now, here's the thing. I don't really disagree with you. I'm just surprised to hear the U.S. government admit that.
Yeah.
That seems like quite an admission.
Yeah.
What Israel doing in Gaza? Killing over 25,000 people in 100 days. 70% women and children, 43 or 45% children. That is the same thing we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Boy. Fascinating, John Kirby. I didn't know you were so willing to dive right in and say you have perpetrated genocide, but okay then.
After the leadership power, you certainly significantly degrade the terrorist organization's ability to and conduct attacks by going after its leadership. You are probably not going to eliminate the ideology which underpins that.
Also, this going after the leadership thing is also bullshit and garbage because, yeah, sure, Israel, if they could find Hamas leadership, yes, they kill them. I'm not saying they wouldn't, but that's not really their aim. Their aim is to ethnically cleanse Gaza. That's their aim. So if they kill Hamas leadership, it's almost accidental. It's almost like, well, we were murdering tens of thousands, so you're going to hit a couple of Hamas leaders. However, as I brought to you the other day, even the New York Times has admitted, although it was quietly in a tiny, sub-paragraph, has admitted that Israel so far has killed 0 senior Hamas leaders. 0. 0.
Wow.
So,
no shit, eh?
Israel has not achieved that, if that is their goal. I think it's quite evident that their goal is, they don't care about Hamas leadership that much. Their goal is to ethnically cleanse the area, bombing anything and everything, trying to take up the hospitals so that anyone who's injured or hurt in any way will ultimately die, and anyone who gets a disease will ultimately die. And when it's the most, one of the most packed, tightly populations on the planet, 2.2 million people on a 25-mile stretch. The one thing that would allow people to survive that disease would be the hospital system, which
you destroyed
and utterly destroyed. I think there's like one still functional hospital. Thank you, Don, Sean, Leah, for the donation. You guys rock. Those of you supporting the show, you are the best, and you are the reason I'm able to keep doing this. So I wanted to bring you that our own national security spokesman saying that what Israel's doing right now is not that much different than what we do. Genocide. What's a genocide amongst friends, right? It's very similar to what we love genociding. They love genociding. So, piping hot, fresh cup of genociders. We love it. They love it. That's part of the reason we are friends. But so here is before I get to Hamas's statement, which again I think you're going to find very informative and a lot to think about. But here is evidence that what Israel's doing right now, this ongoing genocide, that's over 100 days old, is having a major impact. I brought you just the other day, yesterday, that it could be sparking off a global revolution in terms of the way many of us think about the world and about humanity and our responsibility to it. But beyond that, and I had said this before, but I didn't have the polling to back it up. But I am always right. You guys know that. I am always right. But the polling to back it up. But what Israel's doing right now is destroying support for Israel around the world. There was, until roughly October 7th, a lot of support for Israel, largely thanks to a lot of propaganda, a lot of efforts, a lot of money spent on that propaganda to make people think that Israel is, the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. Well, it's funny when you take all the people you disagree with and you put them in a prison and you say they can't vote. Boy, democracy works a lot easier, doesn't it? So much easier. Kind of like when black people couldn't vote in the United States, or when women couldn't vote in the United States. Anyway, thanks to a lot of propaganda, they had a lot of support, but a lot of support was amongst kind of low information people, which unfortunately a lot of this world is low information people. It's multiple reasons. Some because people are being propaganda too. Some because people work their asses off by design, and the system makes it so they don't have any time. You got 3 jobs, and kids screaming at you, and you're like, let me sit down and read this extensive article on the reality of Israel. I don't even live there. Very few people doing that. So they had a lot of support amongst low information people and others, but I'd say that was a big chunk of it. And that support for Israel is collapsing. And they are doing this to themselves by perpetrating genocide. So this is from Time Magazine, which is, a liberal outlet. They do not do very much impressive coverage, but that doesn't change the fact that sometimes the truth is the truth, and they still got to report it. So there's a new poll.
Okay?
New polling has come out. Thousands and thousands around the globe were polled, and it shows just
Are you okay?
Israel has lost. New data, as well as I'll also get to how much it's impacting the U.S. Support for the U.S. as well. New data shared with Time from the business intelligence company Morning Consult shows that support for Israel around the world has dropped significantly since the war in Gaza began. Net favorability, the percentage of people viewing Israel positively versus negatively, net favorability dropped globally by an average of over 18 percentage points, which is a major shift in support. That is humongous for 100 days. To have over 18% of the global population completely shift their view of your country. 18% was between September and December, decreasing in 42 out of 43 countries. Bold. 42 out of 43 countries. Net favorability for Israel has decreased. I don't actually know which one it has not decreased, unless Israel's the answer. Because I think even the U.S. has slightly decreased. But anyway, China, South Africa, Brazil, and several other countries in Latin America all went from viewing Israel positively to negatively. And many rich countries that had already had net negative views of Israel, including Japan, South Korea, and the UK, saw a steep decline. Net favorability in Japan went from negative 3%, to negative 62% in Japan. In South Korea, it went from negative 5 to negative 48. Net favorability is negative 48. And in the UK, it went from negative 17 to almost negative 30%. The war began on October. Oh, and yeah. So then the Time magazine gets into a slight bit of propaganda here, just by the way they phrase this. They say, well, war, first of all, right, it's not a war, it's a genocide. You can't have two sides matched this aggressively, unequally, and just call it a war. But anyway, the war began on October 7th when Hamas, now pay attention to the wording here, Hamas, and the reason I'm spending any time on this is because this can be, you can use this when you listen to other reports, this way they manipulate the terminology. When Hamas massacred some 1,200 Israelis, okay, first of all, using the term massacre, now that would be fine if they used that term for all people killed on either side, but you'll see they don't. Massacre is specifically reserved, apparently, for the behavior of Hamas in this situation. Only Hamas is capable of massacring. All other campaigns or conflicts or things the U.S. or Israel or others do, that is not a massacre. Only Hamas can massacre. They say Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis. We now know that if you subtract from that 1,200 IDF, because this is, you're calling it a war, you wouldn't say that you wouldn't act like that's innocent civilians. You subtract from that IDF, and then you subtract from that the people the IDF killed, which is a lot, then the actual number that Hamas killed that were not either soldiers, police, or were killed by IDF, you get down to a tiny number. We'll never know what that number is because there's too much has been covered up. Anyway, I'm going to get more into that in a moment. But Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis, took 240 hostages. Israel's retaliation has resulted, the passive voice it's just resulted. It's just a result. It's not done by anyone, right? No one actively killed someone. It's just resulted. How about, here's another way to, Israel's retaliation has resulted in a reported, let's separate ourselves from another step. It's been reported, we don't know, but it's been reported, resulted in the reported death of at least 24,000 Palestinians. Now imagine if you rephrase the sentence in the reverse way. As in, Hamas's retaliation for being imprisoned in the open air prison of Gaza resulted in 1,200 Israeli deaths. So Hamas's retaliation resulted in a reported 1,200 Israeli deaths. Israel has massacred 24,000 Palestinians. The reverse terminology, and all of a sudden it sounds very different, doesn't it? Sounds like almost a completely different situation with that terminology reversed. Last week, the International Criminal Court took up South Africa's case on genocidal acts. The U.S. remains the only rich country that still had net positive views of Israel. So we still have net positive views, but we did it with these three, which I think they said no. The U.S. is the only rich country that still had net positive views of Israel. Net favorability dropped 2.2 percentage points. I can't believe it's that low. From a net favorability of 18.2 to a net favorability of 16 from September to December. Now, I will say that there's one thing that can impact, or at least one thing I can think of that can impact this poll, is these are opt-in people so they get a phone call, random phone call or something, and they're asked if they're willing to give their views on Israel. Now, in countries where the view of Israel is negative, people who are upset about what Israel is doing are probably very likely to say, yes, I want to answer that poll because I'm angry at Israel. I want to answer that poll. Yeah, stop. Whereas in the United States, since there's a net favorability here for Israel, it's quite people are more likely to answer the poll if they favor it. So you can have a kind of, it's a bit of a push where these numbers are slightly off on both directions. But the idea that it has only gone down 2% in the United States seems wrong to me. I mean, in person, I have trouble finding anyone that fully supports this genocide. It's incredibly rare. Anyway, in Egypt, so then they talk about the U.S. favorability. In Egypt, the U.S. went from having a positive favorability of 41% to a negative of negative 15%. So Israel's genocide, which is U.S. backed, and many of the bombs being dropped are U.S. bombs, and many of the funds being used to obliterate Gaza are U.S. funds, and the U.S. has special operations. Israel helping them with various aspects of the genocide, and the U.S. is also piloting apparently some surveillance drones across Gaza to help infiltrate this genocide, and the U.S. is also helping them against other countries like Lebanon, etc. And attacking Syria. And dealing with attacking Yemen. So the U.S. is very much involved in this genocide, but it's still surprising that the U.S. favorability in Egypt has gone from 41% positive to negative 15%. That's impressive. In Saudi Arabia, the U.S. saw a similar trend, dropping from positive favorability of 12.2% to negative 10.5% over the same period. Anyway, all of this is to say, point being, all this is to say that this genocide is killing support for Israel, is killing whatever remaining support for the U.S. empire there was. And that is why you see a lot of justification that this could result in a global revolution of varying stripes, maybe just an ideological one, maybe something more. But these types of things this type of net change in the global view of something should not be important. Okay, let's get to Hamas's statement, which the mainstream media will,
Hello, Jack.
Media will not bring you at all. Now, I am not saying, I'm not one of these people, and I don't know how many there are, that think that everything Hamas ever says is true, everything Israel ever says is false. I'm not saying that either. The first victim of a war, a battle, a genocide, etc., is the truth. It's the famous quote, right? First victim war is truth.
Hello, Jack. What do you want?
I'm not bringing it to you to say everything Hamas says is true. I'm bringing it to you so that you can get the side that is not on the mainstream media and come to a conclusion as to what you believe is true. So let's read just a little bit of this. Now, the thing's like 17 pages long, so I'm not reading you all of it, but I am going to read a substantial portion. You can find it online. Hamas's statement on October 7th, which they just put out either yesterday or the day before. They say, in light of the Israeli fabricated accusations and allegations over Operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October 7th and its repercussions, we, in the Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, clarify the following.
Hi.
Operation Al-Aqsa Flood targeted the Israeli military sites. And this is a key point because many people in Israel, the initial statement on it was that Hamas overran the border, right? Because they're free people, right? They're not in a prison at all, but there's a wall there with barbed wire that they're not allowed to leave. So that's interesting. If they're not prisoners, then why is it they're in prison? Could you explain that? Anyway, they get through the barrier, the wall, the barbed wire, everything, and then Israel's stance was they just came in and killed everyone they saw. Right? That was what we were told. They just came running in, murdered everyone they came across. That is increasingly shown to not be reality. This does not mean that Hamas militants didn't kill innocent people. I don't know if we'll ever know all of the truth on that, but it seems that everything we've seen, all the evidence we've seen, all the witnesses we've seen, are not saying that Hamas just came running in, guns ablaze, killing anyone they came across. It seemed that they were going towards military and police installations, and yes, they were killing IDF. Yes, they killed anyone that came at them with a gun because it's important to remember that essentially everyone in Israel serves in the military. So even people who are for 2 years, so even people who are not in the military used to be in the military. Many of them have guns. So if you're ex-military and you have a gun, then all of a sudden that's a little different than just an innocent guy walking down the street. But anyway, so they targeted military sites to continue from their statement and sought to arrest the enemy soldiers to pressure on the Israeli authorities to release the thousands of Palestinians held in Israeli jails through a prisoners exchange deal. I've mentioned this a lot, that Israel has somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 hostages that they're holding that mainstream media will never mention. In fact, when they did the one prisoner swap that they actually had done, and Israel released women and children.
Go upstairs, Jack. Come on.
Children from their prison.
Frolic. Hi.
Hi.
Women and children in prison, like Palestinian women and children. They were like, wait, who are they releasing? We didn't know they had any. Because mainstream media has not told you that Israel has been holding thousands of Palestinian hostages for years.
Love you. Love you.
Somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 more since October 7th. Anyway, therefore, the operation focused on destroying the Israeli Army's Gaza division.
Oh,
the
my
Israeli
God.
military sites stationed near the Israeli settlements around Gaza. Number 2, avoiding harm to civilians, especially children, women, and elderly people, is a religious and moral commitment by the Al-Qassam Brigade's fighters. Okay, so Hamas is saying that it's a religious duty there to protect innocent civilians, especially women, children, and elderly. Now, you can decide, that's up to you, whether that's a lie from Hamas or whether it's a lie from Israel, that they came running in, killing babies, etc. But the evidence that we've gotten, the 40 beheaded babies things has been completely debunked, even so much so that even the White House backtracked on it. Said we actually have no evidence of that. Yes, there are many women and children killed, but in many cases, we have seen that it was in buildings where Hamas fighters were also burned, meaning the IDF came in, shot tank rounds at these buildings, and killed everyone inside. So, in the cases where we've seen these burned bodies, there's a lot of evidence that these were the IDF taking out the whole building. Now, I don't know that Hamas didn't kill any women and children. And also, let's remember, women also serve in the military. Many women over there have guns. So if these Hamas militants are, running from installment to installment, and they're shooting anyone who comes at them with a gun, of course, they're probably shooting some women as well. So that's an important thing to remember. And again, I'm not endorsing any of this. I want you guys to have the truth just like I want the truth. I want the opposite of what the mainstream media wants for you, which is to bring you a propagandistic side of this. I want you guys to have the truth. And if you also want to throw in here, which I know this is important to some people, that even the UN has reaffirmed multiple times over the years that an occupied people have the right of armed resistance. Even the UN has said if you are an occupied people by an invading force, you have the right to armed resistance. And, I don't think there's any real argument that those being held in an open air prison in Gaza are not, when their water, food, medical supplies, everything is decided by Israel, that's not an occupation, that's not a settler colonial situation. I think you'd have to be kind of deluding yourself to act like it's not. Okay, so let's see. So they say it's a religious, moral commitment to not kill civilians, children, women, and elderly. We reiterate that the Palestinian resistance was fully disciplined and committed to the Islamic values Islamic values during the operation, and that the Palestinian fighters only targeted the occupation soldiers and those who carried weapons against our people. In the meantime, the Palestinian fighters were keen to avoid arming civilians, despite the fact that the resistance does not possess precise weapons. In addition, if there was any case of targeting civilians, it happened accidentally and in the course of confrontation with the occupation forces. So they're admitting, and this to me actually gives more veracity to their statement. I would think that if Hamas said, no innocent person was ever killed in the whole thing, 2 days or whatever it was of endless violence, we didn't accidentally kill a single innocent person, you'd be a little more like, it sounds like that's probably tough to achieve that. But here they're actually admitting that if innocent civilians were killed, it happened accidentally. So they're admitting it could happen in the firefights. Anyway, since its establishment in 1987, the Hamas movement committed itself to avoiding harm to civilians. After Zionist criminal in 1994 committed a massacre against Palestinian worshippers in the Ali Brahimi Mosque in occupied Hebron City. This is 1994. The Hamas movement announced an initiative to avoid civilians the brunt of fighting by all parties. But the Israeli occupation rejected it and even did not give any comment on it. The Hamas movement also repeated such calls several times, but received by a deaf ear from the Israeli occupation, which continued its deliberate targeting and killing of Palestinian civilians. So they're saying that they have tried over the years to insist on an agreement between the sides that innocent civilians would not be targeted, and Israel has shown no interest in even entertaining such a thing. Because, as we know, Israel has the Hannibal Directive, which is the whole point of it is killing innocent people. It is, if someone's taking a hostage, you kill them, you kill the hostage takers, and you kill everyone around them who's innocent. So Israel has, mandates of war that are all about killing innocent people. Anyway, to continue from the Hamas statement, maybe some faults happened during Operation Al-Aqsa Flood's implementation due to the rapid collapse of the Israeli security and military system and the chaos caused along the border areas with Gaza. As attested by many, the Hamas movement dealt in a positive and kind manner with all civilians who have been held in Gaza. And all the interviews, you'll notice that essentially all the interviews that have been done with those hostages that were held in Gaza, they said very positive things of the way they were treated. This doesn't mean that they were like, yeah, I should have been taken hostage. That was great. But they have said positive things about how they're treated. Many made a lot of the hugs they gave to their captors. Some of them gave to their captors before they left. But
that's so sad.
Israel then made sure to stop all interviews between those who were held captive.
Really?
Because they didn't want those type of sentiments getting out that they were treated well in captivity. To continue from the statement, and sought from the earliest days of the aggression to release the captives, and that's what happened during the week-long humanitarian truce, where those civilians were released in exchange for releasing Palestinian women and children from Israeli jails. And that's exactly apparently what Hamas wanted, was to take these hostages, get Palestinians released from the jails, show that they had the ability to come at Israel like this, resist Israel like this. But Israel has largely refused, except for that one exchange, largely refused to entertain more exchanges because, and I've said this essentially since the beginning, whether Israel knew about this or not, and the New York Times has admitted they did know that October 7th was coming, whether they knew, and someone else mentioned that the stock markets showed people knew something was about to happen, but whether they knew it was going to happen or not, they're using this. They're using this to achieve the ethnic cleansing that they've been going for years and years. To continue from the statement, what the Israeli occupation promoted of allegations that the Al-Qassam brigades on October 7th were targeting Israeli civilians are nothing but lies and fabrication. The source of these allegations is the Israeli official narrative, and no independent source proved any of them. And again, I'm not saying Hamas always tells the truth or Israel always tells the truth, but that part seems to be true. That all of these crazy allegations of Hamas killing babies and mass rape and all this stuff, we haven't seen evidence. We're still waiting for it. And in fact, Israel has been destroying the evidence. Israel said that they're going to shred and bury the burned cars from the music festival. They say for environmental reasons. So, again, I'm not just assuming one side or the other telling the truth. I'm saying if you're going to make those accusations, then show us some goddamn proof, but they won't. And that leads me to believe there probably isn't any. Video clips taken on the day of October 7th. By the way, Israel suppressed most video footage. Video clips taken on that day, October 7th, despite being the most surveilled place on the planet, along with testimonies by Israelis themselves that were released later, showed that the Al-Qassam Brigade's fires didn't target civilians, and many Israelis were killed by the Israeli army and police due to their confusion. And believe it or not, Hamas, in this statement right there, is being nice. Like, they're actually giving Israel a little bit the benefit of the doubt, saying they killed civilians in confusion. But as we know, we've seen the tank gunners say they knew there were civilians in these buildings and they shot anyway. So if that's just confusion, it was a mandate to go in there and kill everyone. To continue from the statement, it has also been firmly refuted the lie of 40 beheaded babies by the Palestinian fighters. Even Israeli sources deny this lie now. Many of the Western media agencies unfortunately adopted this allegation and promoted it.
Ridiculous.
The suggestion that the Palestinian fighters committed rape against Israeli women was
beheaded
denied.
women. their bodies,
Reports by
is what they were saying.
So a report by the Mondo Weiss News website on December 1st, among others, said there is a lack of any evidence of mass rape allegedly perpetrated by Hamas members on October 7th, and that Israel used such allegation to fuel the genocide in Gaza. I brought this to you as well, that, and yet again, if more evidence comes to light, then okay, but there have been more than one article from Mondo Weiss, at least one from Haaretz newspaper and others, saying that Israel has had a real tough time finding mass rape thing, and you know, most of what went down was intense and furied fighting, not a lot of like, you know, long-term, like, we're gonna go rape people kind of stuff. Anyway, but
anti-Jewish hatred and harassment and tolerating intensifying harassment of Jewish students since October 7th. This comes as reports of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have soared nationwide, but there's been a broader effort to restrict pro-Palestinian speech on college and university campuses and to conflate anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel's occupation and demands for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The former Harvard president